Thank you for coming, and I'd like to introduce Marie Butler. She's our sociology professor, and she is going to introduce our guest, Father Greg Boyle, for today. Thank you.
I want to welcome you all to Oxnard College. We're very, very pleased that Father Greg was able to be with us today. It's quite an occasion for the community. This is his book, Tattoos on the Heart, was the book selection for one book, one campus. So many students here have read the book, and I'm sure some of you are getting extra credit. We like that, of course, but that you attend the lecture, and if we have time at the end of the presentation, we would like questions, if you have any questions. The Sociology Club was able to meet with Father Greg and have a dialogue, and that was very, very exciting for the students. Just a brief introduction. As you probably know, Father Gregory Boyle is the founder of Homeboy, and I always say Homegirl Industries, the biggest non-profit gang rehabilitation program in the country. He is Los Angeles' leading visionary, and I think he has received many accolades, and he's just been nominated to be inducted into the California Hall of Fame this December. So, without further ado, because I want to get to the program, Father Greg Boyle.
Thank you very much. It's a privilege to be with all of you. I'm sorry you were forced to read the book. I've spoken a lot in Oxnard and Camarillo and Ventura, and so I apologize if some of you have heard me before. It happens. I was recently at a foster grandparent gathering, and their huge gathering in Los Angeles. I had spoken at it the year before, and I don't know why they invited me 2 years in a row, but there I was speaking to all these people that had heard me before. And afterwards, a woman came up to me, a grandmother, and big tears in her eyes. I think she liked the talk. She grabbed my hands and she said, "I heard you last year. It never gets better." So I'm kind of hoping she misspoke there. It's like the homie who was in my office, and after I thought I had something of a transformational conversation with him, and he gives me a big abrazote and big tears in his eyes, and he says, "Damn, G, you never amaze me." I don't know, maybe I'm delusional here. So anyway, it's good to be here. It's good to see so many people. I suspect that there's a vision that brings us all together, and it has very little to do with me. It has more to do with us wanting the world to look differently than it currently looks. The prophet Habakkuk writes, "The vision still has its time, presses on to fulfillment, and it will not disappoint. And if it delays, wait for it." But none of us want to wait too long, con los brazos cruzados, tapping our feet and staring at our watches. We want to make something happen, and I want to suggest that for you today. That what we in fact want to make happen is the formation and creation of a community of kinship such that God in fact might recognize it. Mother Teresa, I think, diagnosed the world's ills correctly when she suggested that the problem in the world is that we've just forgotten that we belong to each other. So how do we stand against forgetting that? How do we obliterate once and for all that illusion that we are separate, that there is an us and a them? How do we get to the truth where it's just us, just us? So all of us are called to create and imagine a circle of compassion, and then we imagine that nobody's standing outside that circle. And to that end, what we all hope to do is to dismantle the barriers that exclude. But we have to stand in a particular place. We have to stand with the poor and the powerless and the voiceless. We stand with those whose dignity has been denied and with those whose burdens are more than they can bear. When we get fortunate, really lucky, and very privileged, we get to stand with the easily despised and the readily left out, with the demonized so that the demonizing will stop, and with the disposable so that the day will come when we stop throwing people away. I don't think this is my call. I think this is our call as members of the human race. I suspect if kinship was our goal, we would no longer be promoting justice. We would, in fact, be celebrating it. I was just listening right to my cell phone there. Your ringtone was helping me get my boogie on here. So anyway, so for 25 years, I've worked with gang members. It's the privilege of my life to know them. In a special way, very privileged today to have been accompanied here by Jose and Miguel from Homeboy Industries. I said road trip this morning, and they said we're down. So, and so the homies have taught me just about everything that's of value. But in the last couple of years, they've taught me how to text, and I'm so grateful to them. It sure beats the heck out of actually talking to people, I find, and. But I'm really pretty dexterous at it, LOL and OMG and BTW, and I'm pretty good at it. And the homies have taught me a new one, OHN, which apparently stands for, oh, hell no. And I've been using that one quite a bit lately. So there I am with two homies, Manuel and Poncho, and we're driving to Palm Desert to speak at a high school. They're going to help me give the talk. And we meet at 9, which is the time when the day begins at Homeboy Industries. I have 300 employees, and so we get in the car and we go. And Manuel and Poncho are older vatos, have worked at Homeboy, did a variety of things there. And so we're about 15 minutes on the road when Manuel is in the front seat and he gets an incoming text. And he reads it and he kind of chuckles to himself. And I said, what is it? Oh, it's dumb. It's from Snoopy back at the office. Well, I just left Snoopy. Snoopy had given me a big abrazote as the day was beginning. Snoopy and Manuel worked together in the clock-in room, which is really a hard job to clock in hundreds and hundreds of workers 4 times a day, lunch and out and in and out. And I said, well, what's he say? Oh, it's dumb. Hang on a second. Hey, dog, it's me, Snoops. Yeah, they got my ass locked up at county jail. They're charging me with being the ugliest vato in America. You have to come down right now, show them they got the wrong guy. Well, we died laughing, we never literally swerved into oncoming traffic. And then I realized that Manuel and Snoopy are enemies. They're from rival gangs. They used to shoot bullets at each other. Now they shoot text messages. And there's a word for that, and the word is kinship. How can we achieve and locate a compassion that can stand in awe at what the poor have to carry rather than stand in judgment at how they carry it? For there's an idea that's taken root in the world. It's at the root of all that's wrong with it, and the idea would be this, that there just might be lives out there that matter less than other lives. How do we stand against that idea? All of us have had experience, especially in these days, where even in high school, you're asked to do service, and service is obviously a good thing. But service is the start. It's not the end. Service is the hallway that leads to the ballroom, and the ballroom is kinship. That's where you want to get to. Even in service, there's a distance, service provider, service recipient. You want to bridge even that distance, frankly. One of the great privileges of my life was knowing Cesar Chavez as a friend, and I can remember once a reporter had commented to him wow, these farm workers, they sure love you. And Cesar just shrugged and smiled, and he said, the feeling's mutual. And that's what we want. We want to arrive at a certain kind of mutuality where certainly there is no us and them, but where we bridge even the distance between service provider, service recipient. We want to get even closer. There was a homie who, no homie got more jobs through Homeboy Industries than this guy. We'd find him jobs in the private sector or at Homeboy Industries over the years, a guy named Caesar. But he'd always work for a while, and then he'd sort of gravitate back to vague criminality, usually drug stuff. He'd get high or he would sell drugs. And he'd come back to me, So this one time, he was about 25 years old at the time, a funny kid, a dangerous sense of humor, very smart. And he had just gotten out of doing a 5-month violation in jail, and he comes to see me, and he says what homies often say, this time it'll be different. And I go, all right. So I pick up the phone, and I call a friend of mine who runs a vending machine company in Alhambra, and he hires Caesar right on the spot. And 2 weeks later, Caesar's sitting in my office, and he's waving his very first paycheck from the vending machine company. And he says, damn, gee, this paycheck makes me feel proper. I mean, my jefita, she's proud of me, and my morritos, they're not ashamed of me. And you know who I have to thank for this job. And I said, well, who? And he looked at me strange, and he said, well, God, of course. Oh, sure, no. No, that's right, God, yeah. He said, you thought I was going to say you, did you? Oh, no, gosh, God's number one, yeah. He said, you are so lucky we're not living in them Genesis days. I'm sorry, them Genesis days? He goes, yeah, because God would have had struck down your ass already by now, he says. And suddenly kinship so quickly. But I defy you, actually, to identify exactly who is the service provider and who's the service recipient. It's mutual. I'm in 25 different detention facilities, and I hand out thousands and thousands of my cards, and I always tell the homies there, masses filled with gang members, come and see me as soon as you get out. Don't delay, don't slow drag, because if you slow drag, you're going to get popped again, you'll get caught up, you'll get back in, you'll get arrested again. You don't want to come back here. I won't know where you are, but now you'll know where I am. And I hand out thousands of these things, and it's important that they come right away. There was a kid from camp this morning who came the very next day, And, well, this kid came out named Louis, 17 years old, happier than a clam, and he goes, here I am. I just got out yesterday, and you are the very first person I came to see. And never in my life had I seen more hickeys on a human being than on this guy. It was chupetonazolandia. It was just all over his neck and on his cheeks, And I said, Louis, I have a feeling I was your second stop. Well, we died laughing, and suddenly kinship so quickly. I guess I never felt the sense of kinship more keenly than in the last chunk of years. I was diagnosed with leukemia and went through chemotherapy. And I'm feeling pretty good at the moment, or as the homies endlessly still say to me, I hear your cancer's in intermission. And I said, yes, apparently it stepped out to the lobby to buy popcorn, and may the line be long. But this news was broadcast on the front page of the Sunday LA Times, and so word spread quickly, especially among gang members, and it was very sweet. Homies and homegirls would contact me endlessly. A homegirl named China leaves me a message on my voicemail. Now it's our turn to take care of you. Very sweet. Exactly. And there was a big, huge homie named Grumpy, 6'5", huge vato, one of the biggest vatos I've ever known, standing in front of my desk, big, huge lagrimas in his eyes. Apparently God had forgotten to give him a neck, and he says, what do I have that you need? Meaning organs. I was really happy to tell him I didn't need any of his organs, but it was the thought that counted. One of my favorites was a little 15-year-old knucklehead gang member who kind of came late to the game. I was already going well into my chemo, and I always come back to the office after my chemotherapy. And the homies, they always wanted to drive me to my chemotherapy at St. Vincent's Hospital. I'd be hooked up there from 8 in the morning to 3 in the afternoon, and then they always were vying to pick me up, and there was no question that the trip to and from the hospital with the homies was more harrowing than chemotherapy itself, But at this one time I came back to the office, I was just kicking it in the office, and this little 15-year-old knucklehead gang member comes in, he plunks himself down in my office, and he looks positively stricken. "I hear you have leukemia." I said, "Yeah, I do." And there's this awkward silence. "My cat had leukemia." "Yeah, she died." And I said, "Oh, gosh, I am so sorry to hear that. Awfully glad you stopped by. It just picked me right up there." But one of my all-time favorites was the homie who called me from jail, collect, a guy named Loco, and he had just read this in the Sunday paper. "Hey, what's up with this leukemia anyway?" I said, "Well, it's cancer. It's in the blood. The doctor says my white count's too high." Them doctors, they don't be knowing nothing. I said, "What do you mean?" "Well, hello, of course your white count's high." So anyway, I get a lot of second opinions from the homies. And I've decided to call it kinship. The measure of our compassion lies not in our service of those on the margins, but in our willingness to see ourselves in kinship with them. Homeboy Industries was born in 1988 during the time that I was pastor of the poorest parish in the city of Los Angeles, Dolores Mission. And the parish was comprised exclusively of 2 public housing projects, Pico Gardens and Aliso Village, and together they comprised the largest grouping of public housing west of the Mississippi. We had 8 gangs at war there during the time I was pastor, which is unheard of. I buried my first young person killed because of this sadness in 1988. And I buried my 179th 2 weeks ago. The LAPD said my parish was the place of the highest concentration of gang activity in all of Los Angeles. So we did a lot of things. We started a school because there were so many junior high age kids who had been given the boot from their home school. Nobody wanted them. So I walked out to the projects and I said, "Hey, if I could find a school that would take you, would you go?" And to my surprise, they all said yes. And then I couldn't find a school that would take them, so it forced me to start a school. So we, kicked the nuns out of the convent, and no, they went willingly. And then we turned it into a school. And so that brought gang members to the church. And of course, that upset the apple cart a little bit because aren't churches supposed to be hermetically sealed? Good people in, bad people out. And so that was a challenge. It was a good challenge. And then gang members said if only we had jobs. And so myself and the women in the projects, we marched around the factories that surrounded the projects trying to find felony-friendly employers. And that wasn't very forthcoming. So by 1992, we started our first business, Homeboy Bakery, in this tore-up old 80-year-old building across the street from the church. A month later, we started Homeboy Tortillas in the Grand Central Market in downtown LA. Once we had plural, we came up with the highfalutin Homeboy Industries, as if there was any industry involved in this venture. And then we were off and running. Not everything worked. I'll be the first to admit it. Homeboy Plumbing was not a huge success, as I recall. Who knew? People didn't want gang members in their homes. I did not see that coming. And now, as was mentioned, we're the largest gang intervention, rehab, and reentry program in the country. We didn't set out to do that. We just sort of evolved our way into it. 15,000 folks a year walk through our doors and receive services there. Keep in mind that there are 1,100 gangs in LA County with 86,000 members, perhaps, maybe up to 100,000. And you name anything that might be of help to them, and we do it. Every imaginable curricular offering, from anger management to parenting to grief and loss to, financial management, you name it, we have it. We have a huge mental health component. Everybody's in therapy. We have lots of case managers who, help our folks. What else do we have? We have a solar panel installation training program. We have all our businesses, Homeboy Bakery, Homeboy Silkscreen, Homeboy Homegirl merchandise, where we sell our logo stuff. We have Homeboy Diner, which is the only place you can get food in the City Hall. We have Homeboy Chips and Salsas in 3 major supermarket chains, so leave no salsa behind when you go into Ralph's or Albertsons or Food for Less. And if they don't have them there, please ask them, where the hell are the chips, and see what they say to you as they escort you out of the store. Parentheses, we had chips in La Jolla, California at a Ralph's, and a woman was very upset that they would sell something called Homeboy chips. And she went to the manager and said, I'm completely offended that you sell these chips here in our store. And the manager told the woman, you need to get out of La Jolla more often, is what, which I thought was good, So I'm sure she's never visited that store again, so. And then what else do we have? Well, we have Homegirl Cafe, where women with records, young ladies from rival gangs, waitresses with attitude will gladly take your order. My favorite story from 2011, I suppose I'll have to retire it eventually, but I like it. It was when Oscar-winning actress Diane Keaton showed up for lunch at Homegirl Cafe. She of Annie Hall and the Godfather movies. And she's never been there, and she's there with a guy who's there once a week. And her waitress this day is Glenda, and Glenda's a homegirl, been there, done that, tattooed, been to prison, parolee, felon. She doesn't know who Diane Keaton is. And so she's taking her order, and Diane Keaton says, well, what do you recommend? And Glenda rattles off her 3 platillos, the ones that she particularly likes. And Diane Keaton says, well, I like that second one. That one sounds good. And then something dawns on Glenda. She says, wait a minute, I feel like I know you. I don't know, like we've met somewhere. And Diane Keaton decides to deflect it kind of humbly. Oh, gosh, I don't know, I suppose I have one of those faces, that people think they've seen before. And Glenda goes, no, now I know. We were locked up together. That just took my breath away when I heard it, and I don't believe we've had any further Diane Keaton sightings now that I think of it. But suddenly kinship so quickly. Oscar-winning actress, attitudinal waitress, exactly what God had in mind. And if you'll permit me, here's what I think is on God's mind. And it comes to us by way of Jesus, who says that you may be one. I suppose he could have been more self-referential, but he chose not to be. It's about us, that you may be one. All of us are called to be what Alice Miller, the late great child psychologist, called enlightened witnesses, people who through your kindness and tenderness and focused, attentive love, return people to themselves. You don't hold the bar up and ask anybody to measure up. You just show up and you hold the mirror up and you tell people the truth. And you know that my truth is your truth and your truth is a gang member's truth, and it all is the same truth. And here's the truth, and I'm glad you're sitting. You are exactly what God had in mind when God made you. And then you watch as people become that truth. You watch as they inhabit that truth. And no bullet can pierce that. no four prison walls can keep that out, and death can't touch it because it's huge. But you have to reach in and dismantle messages of shame and disgrace that get in the way. Marcus Borg, who's a great scripture scholar, he says that the principal suffering of the poor throughout history and throughout scripture is shame and disgrace, and I think he's quite right. As I mentioned, I'm in 20-plus detention facilities, probation camps, and juvenile halls and jails and stuff where I go say Mass. But my Saturdays always look the same. This Saturday won't be any different. I'll say Mass out in 2 camps, way out in the boonies. And then I have to race back to Dolores Mission because I've been there for 25 years. I know everybody. People ask me to do stuff. So my Saturdays look almost identical every Saturday. 1 o'clock baptism, 2 o'clock quinceañera, 3 o'clock wedding, 4 o'clock exorcism. Just checking to see if you're still listening to me. I've never done one of those. But anyway, I came back this one day, and it was, I had 20 minutes to 1. And so, in my 1 o'clock baptism, I said, well, I'm going to go to my office and check my mail. And so I go over there, contento, feliz, all by myself, reading my mail. When all of a sudden this woman comes barging in, and I find out her name is Lisa, and she's 34 years old. And this is the first time she's ever stepped foot in my office. And this is the day she's chosen. Everybody knows her from de vista. They've seen her on the street. She's kind of a presence on First Street. She's a prostitute, heroin addict, gang member, parolee, felon. She's something of a famous peleonera and gritona. She's always fighting. She's always screaming. And, you can hear her scream as she's being tossed out of the bar next door, screaming at the guy who tosses her out. You can hear her scream into payphones on First Street, just let me stay tonight, pleading with family members and friends. And this is the very first time she's shown up in my office. And now I notice that it's 6 minutes to 1 in my baptism. So she comes barreling through, plunks herself down in a chair. I'm behind my desk. She launches right in. I need help. Ooh, I've been to like 50 rehabs. I'm known all over, nationwide. Went to Catholic schools all my life, she says. Graduated from elementary. I even graduated from Sacred Heart in Lincoln Heights. Then she gets quiet and still. And she says, in fact, the first time I ever used heroin was right after I graduated. And I've been trying to stop since the moment I began. And I watched as she leaned her head behind the wall behind her, and her eyes became like 2 ponds, water rising to meet its edges and spilling over. And she cried and she cried, until finally she leveled her gaze at me and she said with great deliberation, I am a disgrace. And suddenly her shame meets mine, because when I had seen her step into my office that afternoon, I had mistaken her for an interruption. It's mutual. We dismantle messages of shame and disgrace so that people can be returned to themselves, to the truth of who they are. And the soul feels its worth, says the Christmas carol, O Holy Night. Long lay the world in sin and error pining till he appeared, and the soul felt its worth. Yeah, it's about Jesus, and yeah, it's about Christmas. But how is it not the job description of everyone in this performing arts center? You appear, the soul feels its worth. Exactly right. Well, you're not the only ones who've been forced to read this book. So I get invited every once in a while I got invited to my alma mater at Gonzaga University in Spokane, Washington. And I bring homies with me, especially homies who've never been on planes. So I brought Bobby, who African-American gang member, and Mario, Latino gang member. And they'd never been on a plane. I've taken hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of homies on trips and homegirls on trips. Mario was probably the most paniqueado homie I've ever taken. He was just hyperventilating, nervous. And if those of you have ever flown at Burbank, you know there are no those ramps or whatever they call them, those little sky things. I don't know. You climb up the stairs on the tarmac to get on the plane at Burbank. So we're sitting by the windows, and Mario is just the most paniqueado I've ever seen, you know. And so we're sitting there, and I see our plane arrives, with the one that's going to take us to Spokane, and people are getting off the plane. It's early morning. And then I see flight attendants, 2 of them, walking up the steps with big, huge, extra large Starbucks coffee. And Mario goes, "When are we going to board the plane?" And I point to the plane. I said, "As soon as they sober up the pilot." You know, they're going now with the coffee. Yeah, I suppose I shouldn't have said that. Anyway, we get on the plane. I should tell you that Mario is one of the most tattooed homies we have there. Lots of tattoos, all sleeved out, but his face has lots and lots of tattoos. And but he's one of the kindest, most gentlest, almost angelic homies I've ever known, though the packaging might suggest otherwise, you know. But it was the first time I'd ever been out in public with him. So I noticed people in the terminal, people would be doing like this, and mothers are vaguely clutching their kids. And I go, "Wow, really?" And we get on the plane, you know, and of course he's so nervous. But still, it doesn't derail his basic kindness and gentleness. And so the flight attendants would look at him, and they'd sort of recoil, you know, and they'd hand him peanuts like that, you know. If they could put it out on kind of a stick, they would have, you know. But he takes the peanuts, and he doesn't just receive them, and he doesn't just thank her. He looks her in the eye, and I watched. He did this many times, and he'd say, "Thank you so much," like he was the only one to have gotten peanuts on that flight, you know. But just kind of startlingly kind. And so there was the main talk at night. But there were all these little talks, you know, classes and luncheon and meetings. And I said, "I'm not going to give any one of those talks. You guys are going to give those talks. So start to tell your story." So they started to practice it, you know, and each story would sort of evolve, you know, hard stories. They've had to carry a lot of stuff in their life. And pain and abandonment and abuse and violence and alcoholism and just horrible stuff that kids shouldn't have to carry. But they told their stories quite bravely. And then there was the evening talk. There was 1,000 people in this room, packed, people sitting on the floor, students lining the walls. It was in violation of the fire code, you know, and I did my 45 minutes, and then I had told them, I said, "Look, you guys tell a good story. I want you to, you know, do 5 minutes." And of course, they were even more panicky, especially Mario, because he was very timid and shy. And so they got up and they told their stories, and I said, "Question and answer time." "Yes, ma'am." And a woman stood up and she goes, "This question's for Mario." And Mario said, "Oh my God, no." And he walks up to the microphone, "Yes." And the woman says, "You mentioned that you have 2 kids, a boy and a girl, and they're just about to enter teenage years. What wisdom do you impart to them? You know, what advice do you give them?" And Mario thinks a long time, and he says, "I just..." And then he starts to buckle, and he chokes up, and he looks at the woman, and he says, "I don't want my kids to turn out like me." And the woman stands bolt up, and she says, "Why not? You are kind, you are gentle, you are wise, you are compassionate, you are thoroughly good. I hope your kids turn out to be exactly like you." and 1,000 people stand and applaud. And all Mario can do is hold his face in his hand, so overwhelmed that 1,000 total perfect strangers had chosen to return him to himself. And the soul feels its worth. Exactly right. When you go and inch your way out at the margins with the people who are poorer and voiceless and demonized, brace yourself. People will accuse you of wasting your time. But the prophet Jeremiah writes, "In this place of which you say it is a waste, there will be heard again the voice of mirth and the voice of gladness, the voices of those who sing." Make those voices heard. No homie resisted my offers of help more than this guy named Bandit. He was well named, whoever gave him this name. He grew up in Aliso Village housing projects, gang member, drug dealer, into his gang, into selling drugs. I'd ride my bike in the middle of the night and I'd see him running up to cars selling crack cocaine. And then he'd be counting his feria and then he'd see me. I wish I could say he was embarrassed, but he almost never was. And I'd say something like, "How about a real job?" And he was very polite. "Oh, I'm okay, G. Thanks, though." Until one day, 15 years ago, Bandit shows up in my office, and I couldn't believe he was there. Yes, y milagro. And he says what homies often say, "I'm tired of being tired." So I walk him to one of our 4 job developers who find work in the public-private sector. And so, as luck would have it, they find an entry-level, unskilled, low-paid job, a warehouse, a first kind of job. Now, cut to today, 15 years later, Bandit is el mero chingón of the whole damn warehouse. You know, he's the supervisor of all the supervisors. He runs the whole shooting match. He's married, has 3 kids, owns his own home. And I hadn't heard from him in like 2 years, but no news is good news with homies. But he calls me one Friday afternoon, a little bit breathless and panicky. And he says, "Gee, you have to bless my daughter." I said, "¿Qué pasó, mijo? Is she sick? Is she in the hospital?" "Oh, no, on Sunday she's going to Humboldt College." Imagine my oldest, my Jessica, she's going to college. But that's far, that's way up north. And she's moving away. Do you think you could give her a blessing before she goes? I go, "Are you kidding, mijo? I'd be so honored to do that. I mean, look, tomorrow's Saturday. I have an exorcism at 1. Why don't you come at 12:30 and we'll do a little send-off." And so sure enough, Bandit and his wife show up at 12:30 with the 3 kids, including tiny little Jessica, heading to Humboldt. And so I say, "Well, let's stand in front of the altar. Let's put Jessica in the middle. Let's surround her with our bodies and our love. Everybody connect to her, you know, hold her, grab her arms, put your hands on her shoulder. Go ahead, put your hands on her head." And I say, "Bow your heads and close your eyes." And as the homies say, I do a long-ass prayer. I go on and on. And somewhere in the middle of this thing, I notice we've all become chillones, you know. And we're all kind of whimpering and crying. And I don't know why we're crying exactly, you know, except for the fact that Bandit and his wife do not know anybody who's ever gone to college, except me. Certainly nobody in their families. So, you know, we wipe our eyes and we laugh and bag on each other how mushy and sentimental we got. And so to change the subject, I look at Jessica. "Hey, what are you going to study at Humboldt College?" And she was very quick. "Forensic psychology." I go, "Damn, forensic psychology." And Bandit chimes in, "Yeah, she wants to study the criminal mind." And Jessica, very deadpan, looks at her father and she does one of these, you know. And he sees her and he says, "Yeah, I'm going to be her first subject." So we go out to the car and big abrazos, and they all pile in the car, but Bandit hangs back, and I'm glad he has. And I said, hey, Mijo, can I tell you something? I give you credit for the man you've chosen to become, for choosing to walk in your own footsteps. I'm proud of you. And his eyes well up with tears, and he says, ¿Sabes qué? I'm proud of myself. All my life, people called me a lowlife, a bueno para nada, a good for nothing. I guess I showed them. I said, yeah, I guess you did. And the soul feels its worth. Exactly right. Nobody in this room has ever met a hopeful kid who joined a gang. That's never happened in the history of kids. That's never happened in the history of gangs. Hopeful kids don't join gangs. It's not about good kids and bad kids. It's about those who have hope and those who do not. Gangs are the places kids go when they've encountered their life as a misery, and who doesn't know by now that misery loves company? No kid is seeking anything when he joins a gang. He's always fleeing something, no exceptions. And that's important to get right as a diagnosis, because nobody in this room has ever met a treatment plan born of a good treatment plan, born of a bad diagnosis. It's important to get this one right. I'm just going to tell one more story. But before I do that, I want to thank you for reading the book. I want to thank the teachers for forcing folks to read that book. Christmas is coming, so if you buy like 10 more copies, and the book suddenly becomes, Tuesdays with Homie, or the Purpose-Driven Homie, or 3 Cups of Homeboy, or something like that. So if somebody comes up to you and say, hey, could I borrow that tattoos book? Just look them in the eye with great kindness and say, buy your own damn book. The book came out in March of 2010, I guess. And my copy arrived 1 month before the publication date. And so I'm there with my 6 homies, and I'm opening them. Hey, here's the book. Here's the book I wrote. So they're all very, passing it around with great interest and wanting to see if their names were in it, And so my editor got nice people to say nice things, and so there are, some quotes and blurbs on the book. Anne Lamott and Marion Wright Edelman and Carrie Kennedy and Martin Sheen. And they got Jack Kornfield, who's just a great man, a psychologist and a philosopher and a guru and Buddhist. And he had 2 sentences in his blurb, and the first sentence was a bunch of effusive adjectives that I'll spare you. But the second sentence began this way: Father Boyle, the Gandhi of the gangs. So this gets in the hand of Pascual, who at the time was running my parenting division. A homie had graduated from Northridge and a knucklehead in his day. But then educated himself. And apparently part of his job description, I did not know this, was to bring me down a notch, So he sees this blurb and he goes, the Gandhi of the gangs, like, spare me, this is way over the top, So the next day he emails me and he says, well, here's a blurb for your book. This book is astonishing. Father Boyle is the Sarah Palin of the gangs. In fact, he can see Mexico from his back porch. So I immediately forwarded this to my editor, and I said, please, I beg you, put this on the paperback edition. And she just wrote back, OHN. And that was that. We'll have time for a little bit, a couple, 3 questions. But here's a question that I'll anticipate. People always ask me about enemies working together. And it's tough at first, I'll admit. Homie will come in to me and say, hey, I want to work here. And I'll say, okay, have an opening in the bakery, but you have to work with X, Y, and Z. And I rattle off the names of enemies from rival gangs. And they always do the same thing. They think for a long ass time. They think, and then they go, okay, I'll work with them, but I'm not going to talk to them. Which used to bother me in the old days until, of course, you discover that human beings can't demonize people they know. You can't sustain it. So I had this one kid named Youngster. Everybody called him Youngster. And I was going to have him begin work at our Homeboy Silkscreen. And that's our biggest business, our most successful business. And 2,500 customers from all over the country, reasonably priced, high quality work. We UPS to Oxnard. So I walk Youngster into the Silkscreen, and I'm introducing him to all his coworkers, and he's shaking hands with all of them, looking them in the eye, even his enemies. I thought, wow, this is great. Until we get to the end, and this one homie who seems to be avoiding this encounter, a kid named Puppet, and when Puppet and Youngster are in each other's vicinity, they mumble something, they stare at their shoes, they don't shake hands. Well, I know they're enemies because I know what gangs they're from, but he just finished shaking hands with other enemies. I discover later that this is a beef that's quite personal, a hatred that's really deep. Neither of them think they can get past this. So I sensed that much at the moment, and I said, hey, if you guys can't hang working together, let me know. I got a gang of people who would love this job. Calladitos, they don't say a word. Well, cut to 6 months later, Puppet is going to a store about 3 blocks from his house to pick something up. On his way home, he decides to take a shortcut, and he ducks into an alley, and because he's taken this detour, suddenly, unexpectedly, he's surrounded by 10 members of a rival gang, 10 against 1. They beat him badly. He falls to the ground, and while he's lying there, they will not stop kicking his head until he's lifeless. Somebody finds his body and takes him to White Memorial Hospital, where he's declared effectively brain dead. But it's the policy there to keep you connected to machines for 48 hours so you can get 2 days of a flat read, and then the doctors sign the death certificate. It allowed family and friends to gather. I was at St. Louis University giving a talk. I flew home. I've seen a lot of horrible things in my life. Nothing to compare to the sight of this young man with his head swollen many, many times its size. It was just horrifying. You could barely train your eyes on him. And at the end of the 48-hour period, as a priest, I gave him la unción de los enfermos, and I gave him a blessing. And we disconnected. And a week later, I buried him. But in the first 24 hours, I'm alone in my office. It's 8:30 at night, and the phone rings. And it's Youngster, Puppet's coworker from the Silkscreen. Hey, he says, that's messed up. About what happened to Puppet? I said, yeah, it is. And with a certain kind of eagerness even, he says, is there anything I can do? Can I give him my blood? And we both fall silent under the weight of it, until finally he breaks the silence, choking back his tears. And he says with great deliberation, he was not my enemy. He was my friend. We worked together. Now, can I say that always happens? Yes. Any exceptions? Not one. For it should not surprise us that God's own dream come true for us, that you may be one. Just happens to be our own deepest longing for ourselves. It turns out it's mutual. For the vision still has its time, presses on to fulfillment, and it will not disappoint. And if it delays, we wait for it. Thank you very, very much. Thank you. We'll take 3 real quick questions so you can get out of here at 2. You go like this, I'll go like that. Yes?
I'd like to thank you for your talking. I'd just like to thank you for being that kind of person that you are, that we are valuable like you, and we're happy that we have so much violence in our county, and we
Yeah, thank you very much. She said kind things, those of you who couldn't hear. But I wouldn't disqualify yourself. Is there anybody in this room who could not be beneficial to this enormously complex social dilemma? No. There isn't anybody here who could not be an enormously beneficial presence. So, all it requires is a pulse. Check right now, see if you got one. All right, then you can be absolutely a transformational figure here in Ventura County. Yes, ma'am, back there.
What was your calling, or what kind of made you decide to work with gangs? And
I don't think anything really made me decide to do it. You know, vocations, you don't choose them. They choose you. And so, you know, I just I wanted to work with the poor. I knew how to speak Spanish. I was in Bolivia. It transformed my life in terms of a conversion experience, really. It turned me inside out. So I was supposed to go to Santa Clara University, and it wasn't enough for me to kind of run the student immersion service project program. I went to my provincial. I said, please don't send me there. Send me, nothing against them, but I wanted to work directly with the poor. So he said, how great, because the pastor just bailed at Dolores Mission, which should have been my first clue that step away from this parish, don't get near it. And so I went there, and you know, I've been there for 25 years now. Yes, ma'am.
how do you gain a hopeless child's trust? Oh. Did you hear me?
Yeah. Is that the whole entirety of your question?
That's my whole question.
Yes, okay. See, microphones kill questions, you know, because as soon as they get near one, they go, no, I don't want to say it anymore. How do you gain their trust?
Yeah, a child who's hopeless, who's been through, violence and trauma and gang, and they're just so broken.
Yeah.
How do you get them to open up?
Yeah. Well, I think, again, it's not a rarefied thing, and I don't think it is, and that's why we ought not to disqualify ourselves. Part of the task is listening. Unfortunately, we think sometimes the task is talking, and convincing, and don't you see? So there I am on Dr. Phil, okay? And it's a whole show on Homeboy Industries, and we're trying to talk them down from doing crazy things, And we thought we had. And there it's an audience like this, and so I'm backstage, and ladies and gentlemen, Phil and that kind of drawl or whatever it is he's got, and Father Greg Boyle. And so I get out there, and there he is sitting in his stool, and my empty stool is next to him. And to my horror, on his side of the stage is a coffin. It's beautiful. It's mahogany on those wheels things. On my side of the stage is a perfectly reconstructed jail cell. Bed, toilet, sink. They went to great expense to do this. So you already know where this is going. So they fly out from all over the country, little poor kids, 15, 14 years old, with their very distraught mothers. And what is Phil going to say to these kids? Don't you see that this choice will lead to what? Death or prison. And so I had to interrupt Phil. I go, Phil, gosh, how do I tell you this? These kids know this better than you. They don't lack information. They know it'll end in death or prison. Here's the problem. They don't care whether it'll end in death or prison. So it's not about, boy, if only we could give them more information and they could say, oh my gosh, you mean death or prison? I could have had a V8. Instead, it's about infusing kids with hope, precisely those kids for whom hope is foreign. And what is the delivery system of hope? The people in this room. There is no other way to communicate hope without you. This is how you deliver it. It is the only way. And it's not about talking, it's about listening. Sometimes people say, step aside, let me handle this, this gang member is going to listen to me before he listens to you, because I've been there, done that. I go, which is great, if the task was listening, them listening to us. If the task was talking, you're absolutely right. But the task is listening, receiving. How does this kid know that he's valuable? Only by you valuing him. And suddenly the soul feels its worth, and then hope becomes real because of you. Parentheses, and I'll maybe end with this because I really do have to hit the road. So I'm in these probation camps, and after camp, I finish Mass, and all these homies come up to me. Hey, I saw you on Oprah. I said, well, no, actually, it was Dr. Phil. Oh. I said, yeah, I can't tell those two apart either, and so the homie came up to me and go, you were on Dr. Phil? I said, yeah. Fighting with your wife? And these other homies here were dying laughing, but he was dead serious. I said, yeah, but Phil really helped us out quite a bit, and we're getting along quite well right now. Thank you. Anyway, thank you very much.
Thank you, everybody, for coming.
Modern day solution in this time. Modern day disillusion.